You ask an average mayor what's their biggest concern. It's moving people around the city efficiently, productively, and inexpensively. We thought it would be a good idea to have the Director of Special Initiatives from the Regional Plan Association here with us from New York to give us a view of what's on the minds of those people who lead the mass transit services in the world's great cities. Now, what you don't know about the Regional Plan Association is it's nearly 100 years old. They are by far one of the great planning institutions in the world, but they're the civic planning institution, which is to say they're not the planners that are being paid by the city or the county or the states of New York or New Jersey or Connecticut, which is their tri-state focus, but they are the civic planners who are bringing the voice of a different type to the planning dialogue. And as you may know, and I hope you do, this event was not organized by Cisco or Toyota, the lead sponsor, or any of the other sponsors and partners. It was actually organized by the Regional Plan Association staff. Let me introduce you to who from the Regional Plan Association to give us a glimpse. What's on the minds of the great cities and their urban transit leaders? Thanks, Juliet.
Good morning. Vicente offered for me a perfect segue when he started talking about the city's exchanges that Barcelona engages in, because this is exactly what we had in mind when we put together the Transit Leadership Summit. So the Transit Leadership Summit was the concept for this, well, let me say, the Transit Leadership Summit is a series of 3 events that will take place over the next 3 years. One happened this past year and 2 more are to come. And the concept is to get together the CEOs of the world's most innovative transit agencies together in a small group setting, off the record, so they can have candid discussions of their biggest challenges and also and receive advice from the other transit agencies about what might have worked in their cities, and see if that might apply to each other. So in order to be as candid as possible, we limited the group to 30. It was a very intimate group. And the beauty, of course, is that these agencies are not competing with each other, right? They are operating on completely different continents in many cases, certainly different countries. And in fact, they were peers. And so they were really the best source of advice for each other. And that also encouraged them to be as frank as possible with each other. And they were. So anyway, over the course of 3 days, we learned about a lot of very exciting innovations happening, and I'm just going to go over a few of them here. First, in analytics, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and I'd like to focus on Singapore, which was one of the cities that came to the summit, because they have really taken this concept the farthest. They have learned to analyze, over the last several years, the data collected at the turnstiles from their smart cards, from their touch and tap-and-go cards. And they use it to describe, predict, and even improve their transit operations. Singapore, I should say, is a city that is growing very, very fast. Their GDP has doubled the last 10 years. Their population has grown 25%. And their transit demand is going through the roof. And so the reason that they're looking, the reason that they've put so much effort into analyzing this data is simply because they have tried other more traditional crowd management strategies, having staff on platforms, encouraging employers to allow for more flexible work schedules, having off-peak fare decreases, and so on. But still, there were just as much congestion as you see on this picture and this picture, and it continues to be painfully overcrowded. But fortunately, they've had for several years a smart card, a card with a chip that you tap into the system. And because a smart card is associated with only one particular customer, each customer only owns one, that data that is accessible to the transit agency can be analyzed and compiled. And you can learn about things like how often does the person access the transit system? And is it always at the same time? Is it always at the same station? For systems that have a tap in and tap out system, like Singapore, also like San Francisco and any other city whose fares depend on distance or on zones, you can also figure out how long it takes to get from your origin station to your destination station. And because Singapore's transit data analysis is so quick, in 15 minutes they can crunch the live data, they can tell immediately if a particular route is taking longer than usual. And then they have the systems to redirect people to other parts of the network. Say, if the problem is on the metro, they can redirect people to the redundant systems on the bus express line, for example. Oh, also, they control the tolls that they use to control congestion in downtown Singapore, and these can be changed to the minute. So again, if the transit system is overly burdened, they can lighten the tolls on the roads and vice versa. By the way, they also use data crunching for long-term planning, because as I said, there's so much growth happening on the island that when a new development, a new housing development, or a new commercial development gets proposed, they can model that in a very sophisticated way, thanks to all of the data that they've been collecting for the last months and years. Okay, so the system has worked, hold on. The system has worked really well for Singapore, and we were surprised to hear that even though many other cities have access to the same data, in other words, many cities have these smart card systems, very few of them go through the trouble of analyzing them. I suppose it's like Colin Harrison was talking about yesterday, that there are these clouds of data that just exist but are not necessarily analyzed and taken advantage of. And by the way, this data could also be used in other ways. I mean, another topic that came up a lot at the summit is fair equity, fair policy and fair equity, and how to make sure that people of different incomes have access to the transit system. And a smart card system, because again, it's linked to one particular person, allows for, theoretically, I'm not sure that it's ever been done, but theoretically, it would allow you to segment the market, right? And to charge less to the people who could afford less. And by the way, this has been done in other areas, like I think in the US, food stamp benefits now are distributed on a debit card system and with varying amounts. So it's totally possible to imagine this replicating to the world of transit, but I don't know that it's been done yet. But several CEOs at this event were intrigued by the idea. So these so-called smart cards, or contactless cards, many cities have adopted them in the last 10, 15 years. I'd say they're probably sort of the best that we have right now. New York still doesn't have them, but as John Walton pointed out yesterday, they are still a local currency, right? If you go to San Francisco, you need to buy San Francisco's card. If you go to LA, you need LA's card. This is San Francisco's and Hong Kong's, by the way. And so a few cities are looking to adopt a more universal card, and that is simply a bank card, a credit card, a debit card. So instead of tapping your specially produced transit card, you would just tap your chip-enabled credit card. And the advantage of this, well, for the transit agency, the advantage of this is that they no longer have to produce a special medium for collecting fares. They don't have to maintain ticket vending machines. They don't have to have the armored trucks picking up cash. The whole system is cashless. And for the customers, of course, the benefit is that you don't have, you can use the same card no matter where you're going. You don't have an additional card to carry in your wallet and so on. And I'm happy to say that it looks like London is going to be the first to transition to this system by the end of next year. They're thinking the whole tube will be accessible, tube and bus, I think, will be accessible with this bank card technology. They have already done some experiments on certain bus lines during the Olympics, and they were very successful. But other cities are looking into this too, Washington, D.C., Stockholm, and a few others. Okay, open data. So yesterday we talked about the importance of making data available for the thousands of smart developers who have the passion and the time to turn them into really useful information applications for transit customers. And we talked about how neat it would be to have, like, you have a Google map that shows you the red parts of the system and the green parts of the system, but for transit. And I've never seen that. But some cities, including San Francisco, Montreal, Boston, and I'm sure others, do make real-time information data available about the precise location of their buses and trains. And developers have, here's Boston's, Boston released this data about 3 years ago, and they feature now 53, in other words, the transit agency features on its website 53 applications developed by private entities. And I just show you two of them here. One of them shows where the bus is on a particular line, and the other, the train. They're still a little crude, but you can imagine that in the future be able to have prettier, more sophisticated data. But many cities are still not interested in releasing this data. And we've talked a lot about this, so I won't really go into it, but in some cases, because these are transit systems, there are security concerns, although the cities that have released the data say they've never experienced a single incidence of terrorism based on the data available. There are also some physical infrastructure complications about how do you get the signal from a train through a very long tunnel if there's no Wi-Fi in the system and so on. But the culture, it is possible, and the culture just has to change. It's just changing slowly. Another topic that we talked a lot about at the summit was customer service and branding. And Hong Kong had, hands down, the most developed branding and customer service strategy. We heard all about it, and it was just fascinating. They are constantly promoting their system. They run TV ads, and in fact, I'm going to show one to you. And their strategy is to, they pay close attention to trying to create really an emotional bond between the customers and the transit providers. And let me just play this 1-minute video, because it's just so not like what we have in the US.
有人捱更抵夜做大事，我哋淨係為咗冇事發生啫。你見我哋係咁揾，其實我哋揾緊嘅，偏偏就係我哋最唔想見到嘅獵物。晚晚行足10公里，除咗路軌，連埋架空電纜、信號系統，幾千個同事嘅分工合作。人就話1年波啲車一次。 佢就無時無刻俾我哋 check 緊。我哋而家發現咗條打橫嘅獵物，位置係1.8公里左右。有個零鐘就開車，突發起嚟啊！即場開刀都試過。有時會阻到大家，我都唔想嘅。希望乘客體諒啦。每日400幾萬乘客喎，每行多一步就會令服務變得更好。飲湯啦！咁多年嚟，除咗獵物，我仲揾到自己。
I mean, how can you get mad at them? And if that wasn't enough, at the busiest stations, they have what they call opinion zones. I wish I had a better picture for you, but they have places for customers and transit agency staff to sit down and have coffee and talk, ask questions, and talk about how the service can be improved. So no one else at the summit came close to Hong Kong in that area, but other cities did talk about the importance of communicating with their customers. And of course, this new wave of Facebook and Twitter and various online platforms have made it a lot easier for information to go from the agency to the customers and back. Nick Bowden from MindMixer was telling me yesterday, and so I put up here the effort that they're building. They're building a website for Washington Metro to get ideas for the future, the long-term future of the metro system in DC. So I'm just going to go over this one quickly because I only have a couple minutes left, but you might be surprised to hear me say that transit agencies are not always the best governed entities out there. But just in New York where I live, there are 6, count them, 6 different entities that provide train service. And for the most part, there's very little coordination between them. Well, Santiago, the capital of Chile, has made great strides in this effort to consolidate and organize what had been a very disparate and disorganized transit service. Until recently, the government operated a metro system and a few bus lines, but for the most part, it was a million little small bus companies that provided redundant service. Schedules were not coordinated. Schedules were often kind of not really followed. And the whole thing was just a big, big mess. And for years, the government tried to get a handle on this situation. And finally, in 2007, they created a new transit agency called Transantiago, and they did not take over all of these lines, but they did help them buy buses. And they reorganized the routes so that the buses feed into the metro system, so that it's just a generally much more comprehensive system. They also issue a common fare card. And it's been hugely, hugely successful. I mean, they've had some bumps along the road, but for the most part, it's just much more reliable and better service than before. Okay, the very last urban mobility innovation that I want to talk about, that we talked about at the summit, is what Susan Zielinski was talking about yesterday, which is that transit agencies, the most progressive among them anyway, and really mostly they're in Europe, are starting to think of themselves not just as a transit agency, but as a part of a comprehensive urban mobility network. And London is a great example, and I have a great image here. About 10 years ago, they created one agency, Transport for London. It controls the tube, buses, ferries, bikes, the roadway congestion charge, pedestrian spaces, everything. And they set out for themselves a clear, comprehensive strategy for how to improve transportation in London as a whole, and then specific goals in each area. And they've been hugely successful. The congestion charge has really helped shore up finances for the public transit services and improve them. And traffic has gone down. The share of trips taken in a car has gone down 11%. In the world of transportation, that's phenomenal. But still there are many American cities have not gotten to this point yet. And why is that? And there are many, many, many exciting innovations to be made. We heard a lot about them the last couple days. And transit just takes a long time. And I think in part, it has to do with, Bill Reinert's panel yesterday was talking about how the development and life cycle of cars was so much longer than for tech. Well, I would say the development and life cycle for transit is multiple times what it is for cars. And so this mismatch, I think, is a big source of the problem. But it's also not about technology. It's also about people. I tried to make an equation, but I'm not a math person, so it's not going to be as impressive as Matt Globe's presentation. But the point is that technology and new ideas are great, but you also need the right people in the right places at the right time. And sometimes, you just have to wait 5 or 10 years for that to happen, and it's frustrating. So anyway, I'd like to end by saying that I feel very lucky to have access to a group of folks who think and breathe this stuff all the time. And we're going to have 2 more of these summits, this next spring and the spring after that. And I would love your ideas and input about how you think that transit systems could be improved with some of the technologies that we've been talking about the last couple of days, and just generally new ideas. And also why they haven't caught on quite as fast as they should have been. So thank you.